Let's learn about eating etiquette, shall we?
Good idea. Here's today's Riff to tell us all about it.
And as always, we'll provide the commentary so that you know you are not alone.
I prefer the oboe.
I prefer the accordion.
I prefer bounding.
If it's beginning responsibility, shouldn't it be breakfast room manners?
I think it should be restroom manners. Like, always put down the seat after you go.
Why are you looking at me? That was Chelsea. She always goes with the seat up.
Boy, hush up.
Cortland State University, go State!
Where the flip is the state of Cortland?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag.
Lunch one day,
Man, look at those
puppet
crew
show
cuts.
was put
Those
on
were
at
the
school.
days.
It was called Mr. Bungle Goes to Lunch.
It's a sequel to Mr. Bungle Takes a
It
Nap
was fun
After
to
Breakfast.
watch. In the puppet show, Mr. Bungle came to the boys' room on his way to
Oh,
lunch.
this should be
He
fun.
looked at his hands. His hands were dirty,
Well, his face isn't going to win any
and his
awards
hair
either.
was messy.
Mr. Bungle has fleas.
But Mr. Bungle didn't stop to wash his hands.
Waka,
or
waka,
comb his
waka, waka,
hair.
waka.
He went right to lunch.
That's not even that funny.
Yeah, stop laughing.
Then, instead of getting into line at the lunchroom, Mr. Bungle pushed everyone aside and went right to the front. Even though this made the children laugh,
The children have
no
been
one thought that was a
desensitized to
fair
violence.
thing to do. Then, in the lunchroom, Mr. Bungle was so clumsy and impolite that he knocked over everything.
He
No one
jackslapped
wanted
and
to sit
backhanded
next to
all
him.
his classmates.
And when he finally knocked his own tray off the table,
He killed
that
all the
was
other
end of
children.
the puppet show. The children knew that even though Mr. Bungle was funny to watch, he wouldn't be much fun to eat with.
Though they acknowledge that always
Phil
being
knew
able to
that
get
a
at the
Mr.
front of the
Bungle
line would
wouldn't
have
have
its
many friends.
advantages.
Is he
He
clapping or
wouldn't
having
want to
a
be like Mr.
seizure?
Bungle. Later, Miss Brown said it was time for the children who ate in the cafeteria to go to lunch. She hoped there weren't any Mr. Bungles in this room.
Just kids' dweeby jacked up pants.
Phil stopped to return a book to Miss Brown while
Here's
his
your
friends
copy of
went on to the
Twilight.
lunchroom.
Phil's putting the moves on
He would
Miss
have to catch up
Brown.
with that
Can't
later.
blame him.
On his way to catch up with his friends, Phil almost walked past the boys' room, but he stopped and thought.
If I pee on
Were
my
his
hands,
hands
that's almost
clean?
just like washing
No,
them.
they were a little dirty. Phil remembered that Mr. Bungle didn't wash his hands. Mr.
Should
Bungle's
he be
hair was
putting his
messy
filthy
too.
hands in his hair
Phil
like
didn't
that?
want to be like Mr. Bungle.
All right, whoever's at my favorite urinal better
Inside the
scram
boys' room,
pronto.
Phil was surprised to see some of his friends washing their hands
At the
too.
urinals.
Phil
That's
washed
funny.
his hands well, with lots of soap.
Dang, Phil. Other people have to wash their hands too.
Ah, the water's
And he
scalding me.
rinsed the soap off. Phil dried his hands well, too. When he was finished, he threw the paper towel in the basket where it belonged. And then he made sure that his hair looked neat.
What hair?
Now, Phil and his friends were ready for lunch.
They were meeting their Aryan Nation contact at Denny's at noon.
Oh, allow us, Your Highness.
There was a line of children waiting to get into the lunchroom
There's a
when Phil
secret
got there.
passage to the lunchroom somewhere
He
in
saw
this
some
wall.
boys he knew
Heil
at the front
Hitler.
of the line. They waved for him to go up to the
Come
front
on,
with
it's
them.
just women.
But Phil didn't want to break into line as Mr. Bungle did. So Phil went to the end. That was the fair thing to do.
Even if it meant
He
his
would see
chicken
his other
nuggets would
friends
be as
inside
cold
the
as Al
lunchroom.
Gore's heart.
The line moved very fast, and soon Phil was inside.
Phil loved prison food.
First he picked up his tray.
Then he crushed Judy's skull with it, just like he'd rehearsed.
Then he got his silverware.
Then he got norovirus.
He put his knife, fork, and spoon neatly on the tray.
Next to his shank, cigarettes, and
And
handy
then he
wipe.
slid his tray along. He always enjoyed looking at the good food in the cafeteria.
We neglected to
It
mention
tasted
Phil
good
is blind.
and was good for him, too. Instead of having a sandwich today, Phil decided to take the hot lunch.
Ah! My fingers!
Phil took some bread and butter, too. And he knew what else he wanted.
Alice
Milk.
Dittmeyer.
But Alice took the last carton on the tray. Maybe there was more milk.
After all,
So
there
he
were
said,
more cows.
"May I please have some milk?" Phil remembered to say, "May I?" and "please." That was very polite. Yes, there was more milk.
Too bad it's only for paying customers, Phil.
Phil remembered to say, "Thank you," when he took the carton of milk. Phil had good manners. He didn't want to be like Mr. Bungle in the lunchroom.
Plus, that lunch lady would probably slit his
Phil
throat
didn't
if you
want to
gave her
forget
any
his
smack.
dessert. The cake looked
Holy
delicious.
Duncan
That's
Hines!
the biggest hunk of cake I ever saw.
It's just a big chunk of
At the end
dirt.
of the line, the lunchroom supervisor said she had noticed how
Bad
polite
touch.
Phil was, and she smiled at him. She wouldn't smile at a Mr. Bungle. Phil went to the table where his friends were. He put his tray down carefully, pulled out his chair quietly,
And let one rip.
and sat down. He knew his friends wouldn't like a noisy Mr. Bungle at their table. There was someone Phil liked.
Josh McCown.
Freddie. He always brought his lunch from home.
And Phil would
It
beat him
looked
up and
good.
take it.
Freddie had a sandwich, an apple, a cookie, and milk.
I don't think that's a cookie. I think a deer was probably standing there earlier.
Ooh,
Before
Play-Doh
Phil
sandwich.
began to eat, he always put a napkin on his lap.
To catch the
So
drool.
did Freddie. Everyone liked Freddie.
Except apparently for
He
Freddie.
was very polite. For example, if he had food in his mouth when someone talked to him,
He would spit it
he
out.
always took time to chew the food with his mouth closed and swallow before he answered.
No, I didn't. I got held back.
Phil noticed how straight and tall Freddie usually sat.
my own tongue.
Freddie kept his feet on the floor, too.
And kept reaching for the stars.
Phil would rather be like Freddie than like Mr. Bungle.
Phil would rather be like anybody
Another
than the
polite
person
person
he was.
everyone liked was Alice. For example, when Alice ate, she covered her mouth and nose. This protected her friends at the table from any germs.
But it made her lap a living
While
cesspool
Phil
of
and his
dangerous
friends
bacteria.
ate, a boy ran past their table.
So help
You
me,
shouldn't
I will
run
give
in
you
the
a wedgie
lunchroom.
you will never
Only
forget.
Mr. Bungle
Her dress
would
is
do
so
that.
smart.
It looks like muscle cells under a microscope.
Phil
and his
cuts his
friends
steak
wouldn't like to have
continental
a Mr.
style.
Bungle at their table. Then lunchtime wouldn't be as much fun as it is.
Yeah, looks like a real hootenanny.
Phil ate
The milk looks
slowly
like a howitzer
and
cannon.
enjoyed his lunch. Finally, he had eaten everything except his dessert. He saved his cake for last. Only a Mr. Bungle would eat his dessert before he'd finished the rest of his lunch. And Phil wasn't a Mr. Bungle. The cake was good.
Even if it was a little gristly and smelled of baked spam.
Phil drank his milk carefully.
He was
Some
careful not to
children are
break it.
messy when they drink milk.
Is he
but not
drinking the
Phil.
milk or smoking it?
As each of Phil's friends finished, they didn't leave the table, but waited for all the others to finish eating too.
Why?
Phil was the last one done. He wiped his mouth and hands carefully with his napkin.
Then he hiked his pants
Then
as
he
high
cleaned
as
the
they would
table
go.
where he sat.
It looks like he's eating
He
lunch
didn't
in the
want to leave
library.
his place at the table dirty. Everyone at the table cleaned his own place well. But look at that table. It was left
Disgusting!
Burn the witch!
Phil thought a Mr. Bungle must have sat there. But Phil didn't want to be like Mr. Bungle.
So he remained
So
animate.
he put his chair neatly into place. And his table looked fine.
Not coarse.
Not a piece of paper or scrap of food was left on it.
Phil even removed the bloodstains.
No Mr. Bungle sat here. Phil's friends were careful to put their waste papers and empty milk cartons.
They're saving
where
the
they
empty
belong.
milk cartons to make empty
In
milkshakes
this way,
later on.
they helped keep the lunchroom clean. Phil was certain that Mr. Bungle wouldn't put his paper in the waste basket and his empty carton on the milk tray.
That's good they have that. A new
Mr.
carton
Bungle
loses
probably
half the
wouldn't
value
bother
the
to
minute
put
you
his
drive it out
lunch
the
tray in the
cafeteria.
right place either, but Phil and his friends did.
Here, honey, wash this up for me, will you?
Lunch was good today.
Maybe Phil can avoid
And then
his
Miss
customary
Brown told
30-minute
Phil and
visit
his
to the
friends How
bathroom.
proud she was of them. They had left their table the neatest in the lunchroom. No one here was a Mr. Bungle, and no one wanted to be.
Except for Mr. Bungle's son,
Are
who was
you like
proud of
Mr.
his father.
Bungle? Mmr. Bungle is ashamed because
Mr.
he
Bungle
spoils
looks like
lunch.
Lady Elaine Fairchild's girlfriend.
Don't be like Mr. Bungle. Have good
Woo,
lunchtime
who got the
manners,
cheese?
and lunch will be more fun for everyone.
Now that was a mighty instructional film.